Some people don't break you with a slap, they break you with a smirk, with silence, with words that stain your skin, like they're part of your DNA, and you tell yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. But here's the truth. The moment you start justifying disrespect, you've already started betraying yourself. I remember sitting at a dinner table with people I called friends. Someone made a joke at my expense, the kind that dances on that razor-thin line between funny and cutting. It wasn't a joke about something light. It was about me, my insecurities, my story. And everyone laughed, loudly, unapologetically, and I did too. I laughed so hard I almost convinced myself I was fine. I told myself, if I laugh, it won't hurt as much. If I play along, it won't leave a scar. But the truth is, I wasn't fine. I wasn't laughing because it was funny. I was laughing because I didn't want to be the one who couldn't take a joke. I didn't want to be the person who made things awkward, who took things too seriously, who ruined the vibe. So I laughed to keep the peace, even though I could feel something breaking inside me. I laughed to belong, but I walked away feeling smaller than I've ever felt. And here's the part I rarely admitted to myself back then. I wasn't just angry at them for saying it. I was angry at myself for letting it slide, for teaching them that it was okay to joke like that around me, for showing them that my comfort was negotiable, that I would trade my self-respect for a seat at their table. I got in my car after that dinner, and I sat in silence for a long time. You know that silence that isn't peaceful? It's the kind that's loud, the kind that echoes. And I replayed that moment over and over again, realizing how quickly I laughed to make myself small enough to be loved. The thing is, we don't always know we're betraying ourselves in the moment. We just know we feel uncomfortable, but we keep moving because we don't want to be difficult. We've been taught to shrink, to swallow, to smooth over the rough edges so we can keep our connections, even when those connections are cutting us. Psychologists call this fawning. It's a trauma response where we please, we agree, we minimize our own feelings in order to feel safe or accepted. It's not weakness, it's survival. And we learn it early, sometimes from our families, sometimes from the schoolyard, sometimes from the people who said they loved us, but only when we were easy to love. But here's the hard truth. Every time you laugh at what hurts you, every time you brush off what bruises you, you're sending yourself a quiet message. You don't matter as much as keeping the peace does. And that's a lie we carry for far too long. You don't have to be the person who makes everything okay. You don't have to laugh when it's not funny. You don't have to make yourself smaller to stay in the room. If you have to shrink to belong, you don't actually belong. And maybe the bravest thing you can do isn't to speak louder. Maybe it's to stop laughing. Maybe it's to sit in that silence and let the discomfort hang there, because that's where your power begins to grow. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say, that's not funny to me. You are allowed to stop playing along. And you know what? You are still worthy of love, even when you stop being easy. There was a season in my life where I was walking on eggshells without even realizing it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, there were no screaming matches or doors slamming. It was the small, carefully placed comments that made me question myself. It was the subtle eye rolls, the pauses a little too long, the smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. You know those moments when something feels off, but you can't point your finger at it? So you tell yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. I would feel it in my body first. My stomach would knot, my chest would get tight, but I would push it down because I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted to believe that the person in front of me had good intentions. I wanted to think that maybe I was being too sensitive. So I ignored that quiet voice inside that was screaming, this isn't right. This doesn't feel good. The truth is, your body knows long before your mind is ready to accept it. That's the brutal wisdom of the gut. It speaks in sensations, not in sentences. But we've been conditioned to doubt it. We've been taught to trust logic over feeling, to prioritize facts over instincts, to dismiss our own radar in favor of what looks acceptable to others. So I stayed. I stayed in situations that drained me. I stayed in conversations that sliced at me with a smile. I stayed because I told myself, you're just making it a big deal. It's probably nothing. But that nothing built up over time. Tiny paper cuts that I told myself were harmless, until one day I realized I was covered in scars. In psychology, this is called cognitive dissonance, the emotional discomfort that happens when your mind and your body are telling you two different stories. Your body says, this hurts. Your mind says, but they didn't mean it like that. Your body says, something's wrong here. Your mind says, don't be dramatic. And what happens is you end up living in that tension for so long that you start believing the lie. You start thinking you're the problem, that your feelings are too big, that your expectations are too high, that maybe you just need to toughen up. But the gut doesn't lie. It keeps whispering, even when you ignore it. And when you ignore it long enough, it eventually stops whispering and starts screaming. Through anxiety, through burnout, through emotional exhaustion that you can't quite explain. I remember the exact moment when I realized I was tired. Not tired from work, not tired from life, but tired from pretending I was okay with things I was never actually okay with. Tired from telling myself stories that protected other people's comfort while I slowly suffocated in my own silence. That moment changed everything for me. Here's the raw truth most people won't tell you. When you keep silencing your gut to preserve a relationship, you're not preserving connection. You're preserving disrespect. And eventually, you're not protecting the relationship. You're only protecting someone else's permission to keep hurting you. Your gut is ancient. It's the part of you that remembers who you are, even when you've forgotten. And you owe it your trust. When something doesn't feel right, you don't need a bulletproof list of reasons. You don't need to build a courtroom argument to justify your boundaries. The way it feels is enough. And maybe the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight harder to make it work. Maybe the bravest thing you can do is to finally listen to the part of you that's been quietly begging you to walk away. There was someone in my life who always found a way to cut me, but they never used a knife. They used words. Sharp, deliberate, and always dressed up in the disguise of honesty. Every time they said something that stung, they would shrug, half smile, and say, "I'm just being honest," as if that little disclaimer gave them a free pass to disrespect me. As if truth, when spoken with cruelty, suddenly became acceptable. And I believed them. For a long time, I believed them. I told myself, maybe this is what honesty sounds like. Maybe the problem is that I'm too soft, too thin-skinned, too sensitive to hear the truth about myself. So I hardened. I built walls. I learned to brace myself in their presence like I was preparing for impact. But something inside me started to erode. That slow, quiet erosion where you can't quite name what's wrong. You just know you're slowly disappearing. You see, there's a dangerous lie we've normalized, that as long as it's honest, it's fair game. That truth is a blunt instrument, and if you're hurt by it, that's your fault for not being strong enough. But that's not honesty. That's emotional laziness. That's a weapon disguised as virtue. Real honesty isn't reckless. It doesn't tear you open just to watch you bleed. Real honesty is tender. It holds you while it tells you the hard things. It speaks with care, not with sharpness. It wants you to grow, not to shrink. And when someone uses the phrase, "I'm just being honest," as a shield, what they're often doing is hiding their disrespect inside a socially acceptable wrapper. Psychology has a name for this: masked aggression. It's a subtle form of dominance. It's when people use so-called truth not to enlighten you, but to control you, to push you down, to elevate themselves at your expense. And the worst part, they make you feel like you're the problem for not being able to handle it. I remember sitting across from that person one day after yet another one of their cutting remarks, and I finally stopped explaining myself. I finally stopped twisting into shapes to prove that I could take it. And I told them in the calmest voice I could find, "If your honesty leaves me bleeding every time, maybe it's not honesty. Maybe it's just cruelty." And that was the moment I realized I don't have to stay where I'm constantly defending my right to be spoken to with kindness. I don't have to tolerate people who use truth as a hammer when they could have used it as a bridge. There's this quiet lie we carry that strength means being able to withstand anything. That if you're truly strong, you can handle people who talk to you like you're nothing. But real strength is walking away from what chips at you, even when you love the person doing the chipping. You don't have to keep proving that you're strong enough to survive their version of honesty. You can choose to surround yourself with people who tell you the truth and still leave you whole. Because honesty without kindness isn't a gift. It's just a weapon that someone handed to you with a smile. There's a very particular kind of exhaustion that comes from giving someone endless chances. It's not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. It's a soul-deep weariness that settles in your bones, a heaviness you carry when you keep offering your heart to someone who keeps dropping it. Over and over again, you pick it back up, you dust it off, and you hand it back, hoping maybe this time will be different. I've been there. I've sat in the mess of a one-sided effort, convincing myself that if I just loved a little harder, waited a little longer, explained myself a little better, they would eventually see me, hear me, treat me like I mattered. I kept thinking, maybe they don't realize they're hurting me. Maybe if I'm patient, they'll change. Maybe if I make enough room for their growth, they'll step into it. But what I didn't realize back then is that there's a brutal line between grace and self-abandonment. And I had crossed it repeatedly. I wasn't giving them grace anymore. I was giving them a blank check to keep mistreating me. Every apology that didn't come, I filled in the silence with excuses for them. Every broken promise, I swept under the rug and told myself they were just going through a phase. Every time they chipped away at me, I told myself to be understanding, to be strong, to hold on just a little longer. But the truth is, I wasn't being strong. I was being afraid. Afraid to let go. Afraid to accept that some people only change when they lose the access they've been abusing. And here's the cost of giving endless chances. You start teaching people that your forgiveness is guaranteed, that your heart is a revolving door, that they can leave a mess and you'll still invite them back inside. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. It's when you've been disappointed so many times that you start believing this is just the way things are. You stop standing up for yourself because you think nothing will change anyway. You get stuck in a loop where you accept crumbs and call it a meal because you've convinced yourself that's all you'll ever get. I can't tell you how many nights I stayed awake replaying conversations, building excuses for someone else's behavior, bargaining with the universe to finally make them see what they were doing to me. I kept believing in their potential instead of believing in their patterns. And let me tell you, potential is a beautiful thing, but it can also be a dangerous trap. It's not your job to love someone into changing. It's not your responsibility to absorb the blows in the hope that one day they'll finally stop swinging. Some people don't change because we stay. Some people don't change because we cushion the impact for them. Some people don't change because we keep making it easy for them not to. I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to walk away. Sometimes the real act of love is releasing them to face themselves without you softening the edges. Love isn't meant to drain you. It's not meant to be a place where you slowly disappear in the name of loyalty. If staying requires you to constantly sacrifice your peace, your worth, your voice, that's not loyalty. That's self-neglect. You can forgive someone and still refuse to give them another opportunity to hurt you. You can love someone deeply and still choose to love yourself more. And maybe the most heartbreaking and healing thing you can do is to stop giving people endless chances. Not because you don't love them, but because you finally decided to love yourself. There's a moment in life, and maybe you felt this too, when you just get tired of explaining yourself. Tired of defending why you feel disrespected. Tired of having to build a case like a lawyer for why you deserve basic decency. I remember the day that moment came for me. It didn't arrive with anger. It didn't come with a storm. It came with a quiet, steady kind of resolve, the kind of tired that doesn't even ask to be understood anymore. Someone had crossed a line with me. Again, they said something they shouldn't have said, did something they shouldn't have done. And in the past, I would have launched into explanations. I would have tried to walk them through it gently, showing them the map of where they went wrong, begging them to see how it landed, pleading for some sign that they cared. But this time was different. This time, I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't offer them a carefully worded invitation to treat me better. I simply went quiet, and I walked away. Not in bitterness, not in rage, but in clarity. I finally realized that silence can be one of the most powerful answers we ever give. Because sometimes, when someone crosses a line and expects you to explain why that's not okay, they're not actually asking for your truth. They're asking you to doubt yourself. They're asking you to give them more time, more chances, more space to continue the very behavior that's been draining you. There's a false story we're taught, especially those of us who are empathetic, especially those who want to fix things, that if you don't speak up, you're not standing up for yourself. That you always owe people your words. But here's the thing, you don't. You don't owe an explanation for your boundaries. You don't owe a roadmap for your departure. Sometimes you don't owe closure, especially to people who have repeatedly shown they are not interested in understanding you. Psychologists call this emotional detachment, the process of stepping back, not to punish someone, but to protect yourself. It's when you realize that engaging isn't brave anymore, it's just draining. It's when you decide that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. The hardest part isn't walking away. It's walking away quietly. It's resisting the urge to make them understand. It's choosing yourself without needing their permission, without needing their blessing, without needing their acknowledgement. Because if we're being honest, a lot of us stay because we're still chasing that one moment, that apology, that recognition, that finally they get it. But sometimes that moment never comes. Sometimes the people who harm you won't see it, won't own it, won't care. And the longer you wait for them to validate your pain, the longer you hold yourself hostage. I remember sitting in the stillness after I walked away and realizing that my silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of boundaries, full of self-respect, full of a love I finally turned back toward myself. And here's what I want to tell you. Not every conversation needs to be finished. Not every door needs to be slammed shut. Some doors just quietly close behind you when you realize you've outgrown what's on the other side. Sometimes the loudest thing you can ever say is nothing. Sometimes the bravest thing you can ever do is leave the explanation unfinished. Sometimes the most radical act of self-respect is simply choosing to no longer be available for people who refuse to honor you. You don't have to make a scene. You don't have to burn bridges. You just have to remember that your silence, your distance, your peace, they all speak for you now. You are not here to convince people to treat you well. You are here to remember that you already deserve to be treated well. Respect isn't earned by tolerating disrespect. It's demanded by the way you choose yourself over and over again. And maybe the most courageous thing you can do today is stop laughing at things that aren't funny, stop explaining why your boundaries matter, and simply stand up and say, "This doesn't feel good." And that's enough reason to walk away.